I never thought buying my dream home would turn into a property war. My name is Samantha. 2 years ago, I bought a small house on 3 acres just outside town. Nothing fancy, but it had trees, privacy, and space. The listing even said, clear boundaries and recently surveyed. I made sure to get the survey at closing because I didn't want any surprises. That detail matters later. When I moved in, my neighbor, Mark, seemed friendly enough. He waved, brought over a six-pack, and told me he'd lived next door for about 10 years. Everything was peaceful for the first year. Then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy equipment. I walked outside, and there was a contractor grading the dirt to create a driveway along the side of my property, about 15 feet inside my boundary line. I knew I hadn't asked for a driveway, so there had to be a mistake. I walked over to the contractor, a bigger man whose name tag read Jimbo, who seemed comfortable telling his crew how to do their job. "Hi, excuse me, but what's happening here?" Jimbo looked at me and turned back, instructing his crew. "Hello? Well, can you at least tell me who hired you?" He pointed at Mark, so I went next door. Mark acted completely calm. He said, "Yeah, I'm putting in a new driveway. I've been using that strip for years. It's basically mine." I told him I had a survey showing the property line. He shrugged and said something that made my stomach drop. "Well, I've used it openly for over 10 years. That's a prescripted easement now." I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew one thing. That cement truck parked on the street meant Mark was trying to build a permanent structure on my land. I paused. "Look, Mark, just hold on." He just looked at me with a cold stare. "I've got something to show you." I ran back to my house, into my home office, and yanked open a file drawer to a folder labeled with my address. I flipped through pages and pages of paperwork until I found what I needed, the survey. I walked past Doug and his crew, past the cement truck, and knocked on Mark's door again. As soon as he opened the door, I pulled out my survey and showed him the markers. He barely looked. Instead, he told me the previous owner never had a problem with it. According to Mark, he'd driven across that area every day. He'd maintained the driveway and filled in potholes for years, and his lawyer told him he had rights. Mark all but pushed me out of his doorway and closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, not sure if I was more upset at the driveway or his rude arrogance. It really didn't matter which one because the contractor and crew kept working. By the end of the day, there was concrete driveway running on my property to his garage. Now I was furious. I made some calls and by the end of the week hired a real estate attorney, Darren Christopher. After calming me down, Darren explained a prescriptive easement to me. Apparently, when somebody uses another person's land, a court could mandate that the use continue. But fortunately, he also explained that for a prescriptive easement to exist, the use generally has to be open and visible, continuous for the statutory period, and hostile, meaning without the owner's consent. After I hired him, Darren completed a title search at the Register of Deeds. 3 years before I bought the property, the previous owner had sent Mark a written letter giving him temporary permission to use that strip until he built his own driveway. That letter was signed, notarized, and recorded. That letter destroyed his claim, because if the use was permitted, it wasn't hostile. No hostile use means no prescriptive easement. With this information, Darren sent a demand letter to Mark telling him to remove the driveway. He didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down. A couple of weeks later, I opened the door to answer a persistent knock. Expecting Mark, I opened the door, but it wasn't Mark. Instead, a guy, maybe late 20s, looking like he just finished playing video games for 2 days straight, asked if I was Samantha Clark. I nodded. "You've been served." And he walked away. I was being sued because Mark had filed a claim. He was claiming to be entitled to own my land by adverse possession. I didn't know what adverse possession was, but I'd owned the property for less than 2 years. I saved and sacrificed for years to save up enough money to buy my home. What if he actually took part of my land? But again, the details mattered. This time, Darren explained some law to me. An adverse possession claim meant that instead of being granted an easement to only use my property, Mark was claiming that because he used the property, it was now his. Darren handed me a cold water from his office door. But before you start hyperventilating, a claim for adverse possession requires a few things: actual possession, open and notorious use, exclusive control, continuous use for the statutory period, and, in our state, payment of property taxes on the disputed area. I took a long sip of water and tried to calm the hard and fast beating of my heart. I asked him if he really didn't own my property. He confirmed he clearly does not. He hasn't paid taxes on that strip, and that written and recorded permission letter from the prior owner once again killed the hostile requirement. After months of legal back and forth, Mark listened to his attorney and finally settled. As a final agreement, Mark had to pay to remove the driveway from my property. He also paid for a new boundary fence and covered Darren's legal fees. Mark confirmed our agreement and signed a document that stated he understood that no ownership or easement rights existed. That fall, Mark built a new driveway, completely on his own land. We don't wave anymore, but I learned a lot from this situation. If I hadn't had a survey at closing, title records, that prior owner's permission letter, Mark might actually have gotten a legal easement across my property. And if this situation had gone on long enough and met the requirements, he could have tried to take the land permanently, all because of a gravel path. My advice to you: if you ever buy property and see a neighbor using part of it, don't assume it's harmless. Because sometimes, the longer it goes on, the harder it is to stop. In this real-life real estate story, we covered a number of topics you will encounter on the exam, including survey importance, encroachment, prescriptive easement requirements, hostile versus permissive use, adverse possession elements, statutory period, tax payment requirement, state-dependent, importance of documentation, boundary disputes, and title risk. If you liked Samantha's story, don't forget to like and subscribe to get more real-life real estate stories.